See, the winding mountain passes of California's Sierra Nevada hold endless beauty. But our story starts in June 1994 with a young mother named Christine Scubish when she set out on those lonely highways seeking a fresh start with her toddler son, Nick. But along the way, they vanished without a trace into the rugged wilderness, where things that will challenge your imagination happened. Okay, so Christine had dreams of reuniting with Nick's father and starting a new chapter in her life. So she packed her belongings into her old Hyundai and departed west from Sacramento. In the back, Nick's car seat held the chatty 3-year-old, always giggling and babbling excitedly. Christine felt hopeful about their journey ahead. And after stopping to visit a couple friends, Christine pointed the car towards the setting sun. And Nick soon dozed off as the Hyundai climbed steadily into the mountains. And this is where the road grew empty, just the occasional passing truck or lone vehicle. And as night fell, for all of us who know who's ever driven more than 8 hours at a time, you start to get to that point where you almost got to slap yourself to wake up. Well, Christine fought that drowsiness of driving so long and in the dark, relying just on coffee and determination to reach their destination. Nick remained asleep, blissfully unaware of growing unease that his mother felt. And as the clock struck just past midnight, Christine stopped at a remote gas station to refuel her car. The fluorescent lighting and the attendant offered her little comfort. So then she got back in the car and then back on the road. And Christine, kind of shook herself awake, knowing that she couldn't stop again. Carson City, where she was heading, was still hours away. The car's headlights cut a feeble swath through the vast blackness ahead, along with these tall silhouettes of pine trees crowding the road's edge. Christine just strained into the void, dreading the possibility of deer or other wildlife darting out into her path. And right up ahead, the road curved sharply, and Christine had to very much pay attention. And it was at this moment that Christine braked, entering the turn. But she actually started braking just a little bit too late. And from there, she felt the tires start to lose traction. The Hyundai then broke from the pavement, hurtling itself into the forest abyss beside the highway. Inside the plunging vehicle, Christine heard Nick's terrified wails before impact slammed her body forward. And then, in an instant, their world became silent and still. And when Christine Scubish's mother did not receive the anticipated call from her daughter confirming their safe arrival at their destination, she grew quite anxious and eventually ended up contacting the authorities. Now, this story is amazing for 2 reasons, so hear me out. Okay, so a search for Christine and her 3-year-old son Nick ensued, but yielded no immediate clues. It was as if they had literally vanished into thin air. But meanwhile, 45 miles away in Sacramento, Deborah Hoyt woke up in the middle of the night with this disturbing dream. The dream just gave her an overwhelming sense of urgency, compelling her to drive along Highway 50 immediately. So she prodded at her husband saying, "Hey, we got to get on the road." He's like, "No, go back to sleep." But she insisted and insisted. She kept telling him, "It feels like right now there is something literally pulling me to that mountain." So her husband finally said, "Okay." And even though the midnight drive, in the remote mountains filled her with dread, Deborah couldn't ignore this insistent summoning. And as they neared a sharp bend called Bullion Bend, she suddenly shouted for her husband to stop the car. And there, illuminated by the headlights, lay a figure of a naked woman in the road. Initially thinking that it might be some sort of a mannequin or maybe a prank, the couple were hesitant to get out, thinking also that it could have been a setup for, other people to come and rob them. So as they're in shock, the couple just kept driving, and they drove to a nearby town to alert the police. And at 3 a.m., the bewitching hour, or the hour when things go on that we just don't quite understand, the El Dorado Sheriff's Department received their frantic call From there, officers arrived swiftly but found no evidence of the body of Deborah that was described. With nothing but an empty road before them, authorities, kind of dismissed her story as a product of her overactive imagination. However, though, one of the deputies, Deputy Rich Strasser, couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was being overlooked. So as dawn broke, he decided to double back and revisit Bullion Bend. And he got out and started walking along the roadside, and he almost missed it. A tiny sneaker laying right on the pavement, peering over the steep embankment where it laid. And as he looked down, Strasser spotted a crumpled Hyundai far below in the ravine. So he immediately, scaled down the embankment, and Strasser discovered Christine, lifeless and still restrained in her driver's seat. In the back seat lay 3-year-old Nick, naked with his clothes neatly folded right next to him. Strasser believed that the boy was dead, but when he called out to him, Nick replied with a faint whimper. And miraculously, even though the car crash had killed Christine instantly, Nick had survived 5 days trapped beside her body without food or water. Even Deputy Strasser said until, he was right on top of the boy searching for vital signs, he believed him to be dead. And that's when Nick's faint sigh proved otherwise. Doctors later confirmed that Nick should not have survived this ordeal, calling it inexplainable. And this bizarre circumstance left many puzzled. For one, why had Deborah, a stranger on all accounts, envisioned the crash scene in such vivid detail, even claiming to see Christine's body? How had Nick also endured all those days alone? Well, we will get some answers, because as the little boy recovered in the hospital, thank God, he told his grandmother that he had left the car, climbing up the steep hill to the side. And his grandmother, Karen Nichols Daniels, was just absolutely shocked by this tale. He said there was a tree that was lying on his mommy, and he said he couldn't open up the door. But then, Nick described also seeing this bright ball of light like an orb that was floating right above him, with a silhouette of a woman's figure inside it. And he said that the orb was leading him up and down the steep hill. And as deputies, focused their reports on the probable cause of the accident, driver fatigue, the impact was enough to toss Nick's shoe onto the side of the highway, investigators noted. Their car had plummeted 40 feet down a steep embankment. Yet the details of Deborah's vision and Nick's survival were hard to dismiss. But to add another layer, Nick's grandmother, which would have been Christine's mother, had her own story too. She explained that in the days her daughter was missing, she had been having these recurring dreams in which her daughter was calling out to her from a road. This story is true, and it just keeps getting even more and more unbelievable. The doctors agreed that if he had not been found when he was, Nick would have quickly deteriorated and died. His survival seemed like a miracle in all accounts. And locals actually spoke of ghosts and premonitions tied to the mountains themselves, bleak history of outlaws, hardship, and death. Christine and Nick's mysterious disappearance echoed similar accounts of travelers that were lost in the Sierra Nevada, where reality and legend often intertwine. In the aftermath, the story of Christine and Nick's tragic yet miraculous ordeal became a haunting tale. It seemed that in those lonely, treacherous reaches of the mountain, the lost sometimes reach out across the void, compelling the living to find them against all odds. Deputy Strasser himself said, "I think something special happened here. It's almost like a miracle. It's a whole series of events that I can't explain. I just don't have the answers." So we have a car accident in the Sierra Nevada where a mother and son are driving, and the mother is extremely tired, so she accidentally goes off a curve and flies 40 feet down into a ravine, killing her instantly. Yet the 3-year-old in the back seat somehow neatly folded his clothes while naked, trapped but got out and went up and down a mountain basically for 5 days with no food or no water, following this orb that looked like a glowing light that had a woman figure in it. And then we have the unbelievable vision of Deborah, almost as if Christine, when she died, reached out to Deborah for some reason to track down where she was killed so they could find her child, Nick. I mean, if you don't believe in miracles, I mean, along with Deputy Strasser and his gut feeling to go back for a second time to look, if you add all of these things up, this story is truly, truly a miracle. And I hope you enjoyed it. Now, throughout this surprising and mysterious story, I want you to keep one fact in mind. To the indigenous Native Americans, Crater Lake was regarded as a very sinister place. Legend has it that they would never look upon the lake, especially stare at it for too long. And you're about to find out why. So nestled in the heart of southern Oregon lies a natural wonder that captivates the senses and chills the soul. Crater Lake National Park. And it's called Crater Lake because if you look at the lake, kind of like my background right now, it's in the shape of a crater. It's actually a very beautiful spot. And to the indigenous Native American people there, this cobalt blue lake was always regarded as a sinister place. Legend warns against gazing upon its waters for too long, because you just might fall under its spell and be lured to your doom. Okay, so picture yourself standing 8,000 feet above sea level, peering into this mesmerizing depths of America's deepest freshwater body. I mean, this isn't just any lake. It is a liquid abyss, the aftermath of Mount Masama's ancient volcanic collapse. So just imagine this serene giant cradled by lush forests and rolling hills, looking like a mysterious cinder cone born from fiery chaos frozen in the time for eternity. And on a chilling January morning in 1975, Charles McCullough, a restless 19-year-old with an insatiable wanderlust, bid farewell to the familiar sights of his Virginia home. And with hitching rides with strangers, he embarked on a journey that would lead him to the misty landscapes of Oregon. His destination, of course, would be Crater Lake, a place shrouded in whispers and ancient secrets and untold mysteries. So with nothing but his camera equipment slung over his shoulder, Charles was driven by a fiery passion for capturing the hidden wonders of nature through his lens. And the dense forest that surrounded Crater Lake appealed to him greatly, like forbidden realms waiting to be revealed. So at this point, as he kinda parted way with his other friends in Oregon, a sense of apprehension just lingered in the air, despite his assurance that he would definitely return within 2 days. Well, as you could imagine, days passed and Charles did not return. Alarm bells rang and the National Park Service Rangers actually sprang into action, their urgency palpable in the tense air. And the unforgiving weather only intensified the already daunting task at hand, as these biting winds and relentless storms just kept sweeping through that rugged area. Charles's father rushed to Oregon, his heart obviously heavy with worry, and with his assistance, a monumental effort unfolded. I mean, you had a combination of ground teams and helicopters meticulously scouring every inch of this vast wilderness for any sign of McCullough. And the father poured his heart and soul into this arduous search, spending endless days tirelessly exploring every inch of that national park. And Cascade Rescue and Emergency Service teams launched daring missions across these treacherous terrains, navigating through these icy slopes on snowmobiles, and expertly skiing down these perilous inclines, and embarking on grueling hiking expeditions in their relentless pursuit of clues. Yet despite their unwavering determination and expertise, McCullough's whereabouts remain shrouded in total mystery, leaving all of those involved grasping at straws. I mean, imagine this. It was weeks of detailed grid surges that seemed to just stretch on endlessly. And hope was sadly dwindling at this point because no trace of Charles surfaced from the unforgiving landscape. And his father left no stone unturned in this frantic quest, you could say, for answers, reaching out to every possible avenue for assistance. I mean, even from the FBI to influential congressmen clinging onto a thread of hope during this agonizing time. Then, a whole 20 months later, on October 14th, 1976, things took a very bizarre turn. You see, hikers that were up there at that time just having fun happened to stumble upon a backpack and car keys just lying on the ground near Bybee Creek. So once they found these items, they took them to the park staff, who went to investigate the area and the items that they found. And what they discovered would only deepen the mystery surrounding Charles McCullers' disappearance. Okay, the location was almost 13 miles from the trailhead where McCuller had last been seen on the day that he vanished. And at the time of his disappearance, and I really want you guys to grasp this, there were 7.5 feet of snow on the ground. The snow was so thick and high that it seemed impossible that Charles could have traveled 13 miles on foot off of the trail in snow that was taller than him. So at this point, as the ranger searched the area where his car keys and backpack were found, they made a grim discovery: McCullers' partial remains. I mean, much of his body was just gone, likely due to the harsh environment and natural predators in that area. His jeans were found, though, unbuttoned, and his coat was missing. His shirt and boots were gone. I mean, was it possible that he had undressed as hypothermia set in? I mean, hypothermia often makes a person feel very hot when they're actually freezing cold. But if so, where did his coat go? And the boots? His expensive camera had disappeared too. At this point, the questions just kept multiplying. I mean, had he been robbed? But if so, seriously, how would a robber venture out in the snow taller than himself? And if McCuller had somehow miraculously managed to travel 13 miles in the snow, why would he have done that in the first place? And even stranger, how had he left absolutely no snow tracks to follow? I mean, right? There should have been a long trail of footprints for the searchers to follow straight to his location. But something else was actually off. The condition of his skeleton was oddly disturbing, and some of his bones from his feet were found in his socks. But his jeans were completely empty of bones except for the broken off ends of his shin bones, which were striking upwards. I mean, where had all of his other leg bones gone? So at this point, Charles Butch Farby, head of the Department of Interior and responsible for the management of the conservation on federal land, reported that the rest of his bones were gone too. John D. Finn in Offbeat Oregon magazine described it as if he had melted away. And the search team also then stumbled upon the remains of his skull, cradled in a patch of grass. And along with his skull was his lower jawbone, partially obscured by the fallen leaves on the ground. But it was found over 10 feet away from the rest of the body. The scene defied logic and explanation. So officers from the Oregon State Crime Lab were flown into that area by helicopter to now conduct a more thorough search again. The area where McCuller was found was described as remote, mountainous, and rugged terrain area. So how did he get into such an inaccessible location? The park rangers theorized that Charles must have been trying to cross a frozen creek, as it would have been the easiest path to travel at that time, and that he had fallen in through the broken ice and then perished. But if that's the case, how did his skeleton end up sitting on a log in a remote and rugged area and not in the creek? I mean, nothing made any sense. Could McCuller have actually been abducted on the hiking trail or before he set out on his supposed 13-mile trek? Could be, and then from there his body was taken back to a remote area sometime later and then placed in this remote spot. I mean, how else could he have reached it when there had been snow taller than him when he set out? The Oregon Crime Lab analyzed samples of his hair and clothing at the scene and determined that Charles had died at that spot and that he had not died or been killed somewhere else. They believed that he died of exposure and that there were no indications of foul play. But how did McCullough's skeleton come to be sitting on a log? And what had snapped his shin bones off, along with his skull and jawbone laying 10 feet away? I'm telling you, this is an absolutely crazy place to visit. I'm serious. And if this wasn't, chilling enough, the tale of Charles, well, here's when things get really interesting with this other incident that happened in the 1940s that adds to Crater Lake's sinister reputation. So now imagine this. Mr. and Mrs. Cornelius stood at the lake's edge, just, out and admiring the view. And without warning, Mrs. Cornelius witnessed a surreal scene unfold right before her eyes. Her husband calmly just removed his wallet and his watch, placing them gently in her hand. And with a determined expression, he settled onto a snow-covered ground, then without warning, launched himself down a slick snowshoe towards the frozen lake below. And you could hear the sharp crack of his breaking leg that just pierced the serene soundings. But yet, he pressed on, undeterred, almost as if something had taken control of him. So despite his injury and literally being fine just a minute ago, he literally dragged himself to the lake's edge, his determination unwavering as he waded into the icy waters at Crater Lake, until they swallowed him whole in a haunting final act of self-destruction. It is suggested that Mr. Cornelius was gazing upon the beautiful Crater Lake, but this time he stared at it for a little too long, enacting this ancient curse of it being a sinister landmark. And when he did, something overcame him that even his strongest willpower could not ignore. I mean, these tales that are separated by decades share a common thread: the inexplicable pull and sinister nature of Crater Lake. I mean, is there truth to the Native American warnings? Does the lake possess a malevolent power that can overcome even the strongest of wills? For those who visit Crater Lake, the breathtaking beauty is undeniable. But as you stand on its edge, marveling at the pristine waters and rugged landscape, remember the stories of Charles McCullough and Mr. Cornelius. So take your photos and admire the view, but heed the ancient wisdom that we often do not. Do not gaze too long into the depths of Crater Lake, because in its waters, beauty and danger intertwine, and the land between wonder and terror blurs into the mist. As you leave, you might find yourself glancing back, drawn by this inexplicable urge to look once more. In that moment, ask yourself, is it merely the lake's beauty that calls to you, or something way more sinister?